Good evening, I'm Michelle Facey and welcome to episode 15 of KBTV, the live online streaming version of the Kennington Bioscope, that being a collective of talented musicians, film collectors, film historians and enthusiasts who, in pre-pandemic times, could be found since 2013, regularly presenting selections of silent films with live accompaniment at the Cinema Museum, situated in the London Borough of Lambeth in Kennington itself, hence our moniker. With our world gone awry and wishing to continue bringing you events to look forward to and provide some comfort and diversion, not only for yourselves in your homes, but in ours too, through the marvel of YouTube, via our own Kennington Bioscope channel, we have thus far streamed 14 episodes, jam-packed with silent films, sourced by kind courtesy of various archives and collectors, many already available on archives platforms like the Eye and the BFI, but enhanced immensely by an amazing array of brilliant accompanists And if you're joining us for the first time, we're delighted you found us here, and we hope you'll enjoy the show, along with our regulars watching all around the world. And please feel free to join in and say hello in the chat box below, where Todd is kindly running proceedings, and we hope you can be persuaded to peruse our back catalogue of shows, which we've now been transmitting here for free for nearly a year since last April. And a rather sobering thought occurred to me as this broadcast approached, that tomorrow, the 11th of March, marks the anniversary of our last live in-venue event at the Cinema Museum, where I was to be found at the podium presenting a beautiful and rarely known 35mm print from the archive of the British Film Institute before a super appreciative audience such as yourselves, accompanied by John Sweeney, seeing the film before. And it's annoyed me through the year. So glad was I that it went ahead, and yet it's so sad that it last for quite some time. Yet here we are 1 year on, and happily on this occasion we have again for you films from the BFI and the Archive Film Agency, and live accompaniment from not only John Sweeney but Costas Fotopoulos too, plus specially pre-recorded music from Colin Sell, Cyrus Gabrysch and Lillian Henley. And on top of all that, our programme tonight has been chosen by the BFI's own silent film curator herself, Bryony Dixon, who has also specially recorded several introductions to the films she's curated. How fantastic is that? So tonight's show is dedicated to the film Fred Evans and his comedy character Pimple, but also to discussion about another British son dear to our hearts, both having been born in Lambeth, and who, between the two of them, dominated the UK comedy box office of the teens. In prior episodes of KBTV, we've examined the work of several continental comedians, so it'll be fascinating to be able to see a deep focus here tonight on someone moving on further from that starting point, as was noted by the Bioscope magazine in their January 1914 issue in their look at the productions of Pimple, in which they observed that the times they were a-changing, and they said, "The comic film, which was for years the mainstay of the picture theatre, was of a type which could not long maintain its popularity after it was found that the cinematograph was capable of more serious dramatic work, consisting as it did mainly of acrobatic horseplay and the novelty of trick photography. The excellent work of some of the continental comedians has created a taste for something better than the contortions of the pantomimic contortionist, and amongst the English producers who have lately entered into competition with the foreign manufacturers of comedy films, Mr. Fred Evans as Pimple must certainly be placed in the front rank." So, without further ado, here's Bryony to tell us more.
Hi, thanks Michelle. Thanks very much to the whole of the Kennington Bioscope team for allowing me to introduce the works of my very favourite British silent film comedian, Fred Evans, aka Pimple. And here we are in the streets of Twickenham, nearby to Eel Pie Island, where Fred and Joe Evans made over 200 cheap and cheerful silent film comedies in the teens. Now, I'm interested in Pimple, not just for himself, although I love him just as he is, but also because he invites comparison with another English silent film comedian, Charles Chaplin. Now, Chaplin went to Hollywood, of course, and became fantastically famous. It's the centenary this year of The Kid, which came out in January 1921, leading him to want to come home to London for the first time in years to a massive rock star welcome. At a time when Fred Evans, his exact contemporary, was struggling in the aftermath of war and bankruptcy. And it's interesting to make the comparison between the two men because their backgrounds were incredibly, strikingly similar. They're both born in 1889. Fred was born in York Road, just by Waterloo Station, in February of 1889, and Chaplin, of course, was born in April, about 10 minutes walk away. So these were, streets full of sort of cheap lodgings where music hall families would lodge cheaply and have access to all the music halls and theatres. They both came from music hall families. They both had brothers. So Charlie had Sydney, Fred had Joe, who wrote his scenarios and worked with him on and off for most of his life. And they both started working at a very early age. So we know that Chaplin was on stage for the first time at 4 or 5, and Fred was working from the age of 3, where he was working with the family for Sangus Circus as a kind of miniature policeman who's kind of flown across the stage on a wire. So here we have these two very similar comedians working at exactly the same time, one in Britain, one in America, and what a different life they had. So we're going to see now 2 films. One is from 1912, which is a character that Fred Evans played for a company called Cricks and Martin. And Joe recently returned from touring with his parents in America, wrote the scenarios. Fred was the star, and he played a dude character. So he's well dressed, but kind of amiable, bumbling, sort of opportunist, I suppose. And Joe talks about this in an interview, which still survives at the BFI, and talks about this character. And it's interesting to compare with Chaplin's first role for Keystone, Making a Living, before he's developed the tramp character. So let's have a look at our first 2 films. So after making a living, Chaplin begins to develop the costume and persona of the tramp that we all know and love. He is learning fast from his colleagues and fellow performers, people like Mabel Normand, and he's improving his chances of being recognised as his own performer. Of course, he was a star on stage, it's what he's used to. And by the middle of the year, when he's working for Keystone 1914, he's already directing his own comedies. Back in England, Fred and Joe, still working for Cricks and Martin, are getting a bit fed up of the low pay and constant interference in their scripting by people who don't really know what they're doing. And they decide to set up on their own. It's not easy because they need finance and premises and investment, but eventually they do find some backing and they open a studio on Eel Pie Island and begin to make comedies for the character Pimple. And Joe writes the scenarios, Fred does the performances, and Joe plays, any character that needs playing. And it begins with Pimple doing this and Pimple doing that, as Joe describes it in his interview. And then one day, Joe goes to see British and Colonial's epic, spectacular film, The Battle of Waterloo. And he decides on the spur of the moment to write this up as a kind of spoof for the character Pimple to play. And we will see in a second Pimple's Battle of Waterloo, which is a kind of extremely cheap rendering of this very spectacular film. And that's where the humour lies, is the kind of cheapness, a very British trait. This. We'll follow this with a fragment, Pimple Has One, in which he uses a trick of the slanting screen to indicate a inebriated state. And there's a fantastic little bit at the end. So let's see our next two films. really love that self-referential piece of humour with the whitewashing of the screen at the end, a little piece of self-censorship. Fred came from a large family of entertainers in music hall and circus and pantomime. His granddad was another Fred Evans, was a famous clown and arranger of harlequinades at Drury Lane in the high days of the English pantomime. His father, yet another Fred Evans, was a performer, and he ran the Floridor Quartet with his mother, Minnie G, who was from another family of entertainers. Her brothers, Alfred and Seth, became the Egbert brothers, who made their own comedy films with their company Echo down on the River Thames, where Lupino Lane made films. And most famously was Fred's uncle, Will Evans, who was a musical comedian. We have one of his films from 1899, which we'll see with his act as an eccentric comedian. And he went on to become a very famous writer of musical sketch comedy, reviews, and farces. He wrote the first ever Aldwych farce, Tons of Money. So he was very well known in his day. So let's look at Uncle Will in 1899, and then we're going to see a very extraordinary piece of film that I came across quite by accident, which we have called Coventry Scenes. It's a compilation of items which was just labelled Warmington 1900, which I came across when I was doing my Victorian project. And it's a bunch of random clips, football game, mother and baby clinic in Coventry. And then all of a sudden, there's this familiar figure who I, of course, recognise because I know Pimple quite well. And it is Pimple on tour in 1915. So during the war, he's joined up with the 21st Surrey Rifles, which is the London regiment. And he's going round promoting both his own comedy films, but also his fundraising and recruiting for the army. So you see him turning up in his Pimple costume, doing an act, and you can see the adoring crowds, and then he goes and sort of sleeps on a park bench. Very curious survival, this. This is followed by Pimple's Part. It's a fragment of one of his films, but it's all done in silhouette, or mostly done in silhouette. It's an actor rehearsing a part, and a misunderstanding with something that somebody thinks they see through a window. And this again is something that Chaplin did. He did with Carnot. When he was touring with Carnot, he did a black and white harlequinade, and he did a similar scene in a film that survives in sort of clip form, a strange compilation called The Professor. So let's see Will Evans, Coventry Scenes, and Pimple's Part. So we see from that extraordinary clip from Coventry the real Fred Evans as he's touring around during the First World War, promoting his films and recruiting for the army and also raising money for charities. Unlike Chaplin, he does go to war. He's not there for very long. He's invalided out in 1916 and continues his career. But at the same time, we see, you know, one going like this and the other kind of declining a bit. So if you look at the press, so the Bioscope, Kinney Weekly, and magazines like Picture Goer, you can see how very present Fred Evans is and how hugely popular he is. He's churning out a film nearly every week. And so people are kind of expecting to see a Pimple comedy regularly, pretty much at every change of programme. And he's got his own byline in Picture Goer and very popular indeed. But at the same time, in fact, nearly on every page that you see some reference to Pimple, you also see a reference to Charlie Chaplin as he begins his meteoric rise from 1914 into 1916, the great year of Chaplin mania. His films are being circulated all around the place, and particularly amongst troops in the First World War. So he gets a lot of exposure and becomes incredibly popular. In 1915 or so, Picture Goer run a poll for, they asked the viewers for their favourite performers. And Fred Evans gets something like 122,000 votes, which is extraordinary. One of the third most popular performer, most popular comedian, and but also Chaplin is given 147,000 votes, despite never having made a picture in Britain. So slightly unfair, but clearly the British audience wanted to claim him as one of their own. On the in the Kinney Weekly in 1917, there's an article talking about Fred Evans, how fantastic he's being at raising money for charity and recruiting for the war effort. But at the same time, they're saying that the Ballon Palladium, are talking about erecting a huge monster head of Chaplin on the marquee outside their theatre. So you can really see how these two careers are kind of intersecting. So for our final two films, we're going to look at a wartime Pimple, Pimple's Pink Forms. This is a wonderful, slightly incomplete film. Pimple, rejected for army service, has the job of delivering pink forms. Now, if you don't know what a pink form is, it's the thing that says whether or not you are exempt from war service. So this is not a form that you want to receive. This is going to be about as popular as a subpoena from the bailiffs. So very funny film. And our last and most complete Pimple film is Pimple in the Whip. Now, this is one of Joe's finest parodies of a spectacular theatrical melodrama called The Whip, which is all about villains nobbling a famous racehorse called The Whip. There is an on-stage train crash. There's a spectacular final race. And the parody is done so much on the cheap. It's fairly hysterical. It's my personal favourite. So enjoy Pimple's Pink Forms and Pimple in the Whip. And I've written more about Pimple in this month's Sight and Sound, and there's an extended version on the digital Sight and Sound version if you want to know more. So in the meantime, enjoy and see you all again soon.
Well, wasn't that marvellous? Our evening with Pimple has whipped past. But before we mount our pantomime horses and ride off into the night, I have a few more words from the Bioscope magazine of 1914 and its assessment of Our Fred, in which they finish by saying, "It is difficult to decide which of these films is most amusing, but it is quite safe to assert that whichever one is seen first will only create an ardent desire for more of the same brand, and we trust that Mr. Evans will keep up the supply as long as the demand continues. We cannot expect any mortal man to do more," which I cannot think could be a more appropriate summation for tonight's deep dive on Fred and his family. We express our very special thanks to Bryony Dixon for her curation and introductions, and don't forget, as Bryony mentioned, that you can read her article on Fred Evans and Charlie Chaplin in the new April issue of Sight and Sound magazine, and of course you can always access Pimple and much more besides on the BFI player. We're also grateful to the technical team at the BFI for supplying the films to us, and to our own Todd Higginson for all his work to prepare them for transmission and much more besides, and to Bob Gagan for his work on Pimple's Pink Forms, held by his own archive film agency. Thanks also to Lawrence Napper for sourcing info on that film. A huge thank you, of course, to all the marvellous musicians, Costas Fotopoulos, Cyrus Gabrysch, Lillian Henley, Colin Sell and John Sweeney, and an extra big thank you to Costas and John for running the live stream tonight. Now, we did have some problems with the live stream, so I just have to let you know that it was John Sweeney who played live for the Coventry clip, not Costas, as they had to hand over the live stream earlier than anticipated. And apologies if there was any interruption in the broadcast. It's very much live and anything can happen. We do, of course, bring you this live stream experience for free, but we would be most grateful if you could see your way clear to kindly stand us a coffee on our Kennington Bioscope coffee donation page, the online equivalent of passing around the hat, the link for which you may find in the drop box below, and the proceeds of which go towards our future programming once we return to the Bioscope's collective home, the Cinema Museum. And speaking of which, I'm grateful to the volunteers there, in particular David Lavelli and Phil Clark for their assistance in getting the word out about the show, and also to Martin Humphreys and Ronald Grant, founders of the museum, who have recently initiated a green development plan for the museum, which is taking shape. And the first step in that process is to rid themselves of their old petrol van for an environmentally friendly electric car. And they've started a new crowdfunder to trade it in. They already have quite a bit of what they need to do this, fund-wise, but are just shy of the last £5,000 they need to achieve this. So please help out if you can, and you can find the details on their website or via their Twitter page. And don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Please do sign up to our mailing list for news of upcoming shows on kenbioscope.com, and subscribe here to our YouTube channel and help take us over the 1,000 subscribers mark by our next episode. Thank you to all the Bioscope team, but mainly to yourselves at home for watching wherever you are. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the show. I'm Michelle Facey, and I wish you all a very good night and hope to see you again soon. Take care and goodbye. Bye.
baby, baby, deed I do.
Do you love your baby?
Sure I love her, baby, precious baby, deed I do.